The rusted hinges of Willowbrook Plantation groaned under the weight of dawn on the morning of April 15, 1863. Confederate patrols scouring the backwoods of Prince William County, Virginia, 4 Yankee spies and deserters had no idea what awaited them in the overgrown family plot behind the grand old manor. 8 fresh mounds of earth, each capped with a simple pine marker, all dated to the night before. But when they forced the lid off the nearest box, the corpse within wasn't at rest. Fingernails torn to the quick, splintered wood, gouged from the underside, and a grimace etched in eternal agony. Elias Hawthorne had laid his wife, 4 children, and 3 enslaved souls to ground in identical pine boxers, all in the span of one fevered midnight. But the nightmare they unearthed went far beyond any battlefield atrocity. What twisted faith, fractured mind could drive a man to such calculated oblivion? Stay with me as we peel back the layers of this buried Virginia atrocity. A tale so raw it was scrubbed from the annals of the Old Dominion. If the chill's already setting in, you're in good company. This one's going to linger. Virginia in early 1863 was a powder keg of dread and dissolution. The Civil War had raged for nearly 2 years, and Richmond, the Confederacy's beating heart and strategic linchpin, braced for the Union's iron grip. General George McClellan's army was probing the Rappahannock River approaches, and every landholder in northern Virginia sensed the noose tightening. Prince William County, nestled about 30 miles southwest of the capital, had long been the envy of Virginia's agrarian empire. The river counties Prince William, Fairfax, Stafford yielded more tobacco than any other stretch in the young republic. The Potomac's fertile floodplains, harnessed by the relentless toil of enslaved hands, had minted dynasties that outshone the rice barons down south. But by 1863, that gilded age was crumbling. The Union naval cordon had strangled tobacco shipments. The rebel draft had stripped fields of their white overseers, leaving estates skeletal and exposed. And worst of all, for the planter elite, whispers of emancipation rippled through the quarter-stales of bluecoats, promising manumission of a dawn without chains. Into this storm of panic, penury, and peril steps Elias Hawthorne. By ledger and ledger alone, Hawthorne embodied the ideal Virginia squire. Born in 1825 to an Anglo-Virginian lineage that had tilled Prince William's soil since the Revolutionary era, Elias claimed Willowbrook Plantation from his sire in 1852. The holdings spanned roughly 900 acres of top-shelf tobacco land, a neoclassical manor erected in 1839, and 52 enslaved laborers whose sweat bankrolled the dynasty. Elias wed Eliza Warwick in 1848, forging a bond between 2 storied Tidewater clans. Their match bore for offspring: Jacob in 1849, Clara in 1851, Arthur in 1854, and Mary in 1857, 2 acquaintances and trading partners. The Hawthornes epitomized the planters' poise-polished Protestant, intellectually urbane, and ostensibly merciful toward their bondsmen. Yet intimates had clocked a shift in Elias Hawthorne's demeanor. Reverend Thomas Harlan, pastor at St. Mary's Episcopal Chapel, would later depose that Hawthorne's piety had unraveled since about 1860. He'd storm into services in a frenzy. Reverend Harlan recounted in his affidavit. He'd mutter devotions with feverish zeal, sometimes seizing my sleeve post-sermon to probe if the Lord might absolve crimes yet unhatched. When pressed, he'd murmur that Satan was probing him, that he dreaded crumbling under the trial. Harlan Baxter, Hawthorne's adjacent tobacco baron and confidant, spied subtler omens. Elias had ever been a touch aloof, but post the crash of 1857, when leaf prices tanked, he fixated on fiscal Armageddon. Baxter penned to his kin. He'd ramble of grand schemes to safeguard his line's repute should Willowbrook fold. He vowed provisions to shield his heirs from want or disgrace. I figured annuities or entailments. Now I grasp his true intent, and it ices my veins. The enslaved at Willowbrook beheld a grimmer unraveling. Per post-war Reconstruction probes, survivors from the estate-limbed Elias Hawthorne's psychic spiral in the lead-up to 1863. An aged woman called Eliza, bound to Willowbrook from girlhood, deposed that Hawthorne commenced odd vespers in the estate oratory circa 1861. He'd heard a psalm in post-Sabbath supper, Eliza recalled. He'd declaim from the good book, but not the familiar verses. He'd intone from Revelation on the Apocalypse. He'd cite Abraham's trial with Isaac, commanded to slay his own. He'd preach that the divine at times exacts horrors from the just, that yielding to heaven's decree demands valor beyond the common soul. His gaze, in those moments, was unhinged, glazed, as if beholding phantoms veiled from us. Most unnerving by sundry accounts were Hawthorne's dealings with three specific enslaved folk: Josiah, a 42-year-old foreman in the curing sheds; Rebecca, Josiah's spouse, who tended the big house; and their lad, Solomon, 1863. Josiah, Rebecca, and Solomon held a peculiar perch at Willowbrook. Elias's potter had acquired Josiah's forebears in 1807, spanning 3 generations in service to the Hawthornes. By later affidavits, Elias Hawthorne nursed a near-filial bond with Josiah, oft polling him on crop yields and granting rarities like literacy, pocket coin, and a quarters cabin distanced from the communal rows. Yet this affinity harbored shadow. Hawthorne fancied Josiah's kin fused to the Hawthorne bloodline, not merely by deed, but by some arcane, near-sacrosanct tie. In ledgers unearthed post-massacre, Hawthorne scrawled, "Josiah comprehends what kin cannot, that our threads are plaited by fate." When I unveiled my pact with the Eternal, he sobbed, yet assented. He grasps that select offerings weld everlasting ties. Through 1862, as cannonade erupted and the Ancien regime frayed, Elias Hawthorne's conduct veered into outright alarm. He shunned tobacco syndicate gatherings. He forewent neighborly rounds. He cloistered in the oratory for spans, sometimes till cockcrow, surfacing at first light with dilated pupils and quaking grip. Eliza Hawthorne, his bride, unburdened to her sibling, Priscilla, in a missive of December 18, 1862. He prattles ceaselessly of closings and rebirths. He claims the bygone epoch wanes, and we must brace for metamorphosis. He's commenced queer setups, sorting 8 pine boxes from the miller in Bristow, staking 8 slots in our kin-burying ground, even sketching ornate obsequies. When I probe these overtures, he flares and demands my faith in his insight, that he's vouchsafed esoteric lore on the morrow. Sister, I own, I'm afeard. The gent I espoused seems supplanted by a stranger scarce known. Priscilla never got that dispatch. It lay unposted amid the fallout. By March 1863, tensions at Willowbrook Plantation crested perilously. Federal hosts manifestly geared for Richmond's fall. Bondsmen countywide bolted for Yankee pickets. The century-spanning caste and commerce that forged Virginia teetered, and Elias Hawthorne decreed the safeguard for his clan's esteem. The inaugural overt signal of calamity struck March 22, 1863, when Josiah materialized at the Bristow Mercantile with a queer petition. Per proprietor Josiah Caldwell's ensuing testimony, Josiah came solo a rarity, as Willowbrook's enslaved ventured to Hamlet only under pale escort or penned leave. Josiah bore a scrip purportedly from Elias Hawthorne, soliciting sundry oddments: 8 bleached muslin winding sheets, 8 tapers of precise girth, and a hefty stock of laudanum, the poppy draft routine for ache and slumber. I queried Josiah if ailment stalked Willowbrook. Caldwell deposed. He regarded me with sorrow profounder than any mortal mask, and uttered, "We're all perishing, sir." Saws, merely easing the passage serene. I pegged it as allegory for the strife, their realm expiring. I gif on now at my myopia. He voiced the stark verity, and I dispatched the tally regardless. Grimmer yet was the sequel. As Josiah tallied his haul, youthful Elias Caldwell, the merchant's heir, quizzed Josiah on dread of the Bluebell Legion's inbound. Josiah rejoined, Nay, I dread more what Sa schemes for us ere they arrive. When Elias pressed for clarity, Josiah merely wagged his head and decamped. The Caldwells mulled this eerie exchange that gloaming, but chalked it to a thrall's war-weary jitters. They lacked the lens to envision Elias Hawthorne's veritable scheme. The sophomore episode unfolded March 29th. When Dr. Henry Marsden rode to Willowbrook at Elias Hawthorne's behest, Dr. Marsden, who plied his trade in Manassas and ministered to divers county spreads, anticipated quelling ague or croup rife in Virginia's clammy spring. Instead, Elias Hawthorne greeted him with an aberrant ask. He bade me assay his whole household, Dr. Marsden deposed later. His missus, his forget, and moreover, Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon 3 thralls, he urged I probe as rigorously as his freeborn. On quizzing symptoms, Hawthorne averred he craved certification that they all stood hale at present. He termed this docket vital for anchoring the chronology. Dr. Marsden ran the probes. Eliza Hawthorne seemed fretful, yet fit. The young, Jacob, 14, Clara, 12, Arthur, 9, and Mary, 6 all sound, though Dr. Marsden marked them unduly hushed. Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon likewise throve, save Josiah's air of fathomless gloom. Post-essays, Elias pressed for exhaustive scribing of the hour and verdicts. Dr. Marsden recollected, and he had me endorse and time-stamp the sheaf, then stowed it in his escritoire. He voiced, When they unearth us, they'll require proof we were whole air. They'll grasp this was volition, not mischance. I sought his drift, but he merely proffered thanks and ushered me forth. Dr. Marsden quit Willowbrook profoundly disquieted. He aired the odd house call to his spouse that eve, but akin to the Caldwells. He couldn't conjure the veridical terror looming. Psyche recoils from select horrors till proof batters the door. The tertiary episode, the one hindsight deems ought have sparked swift succor, transpired April 5th, when Reverend Harlan motored to Willowbrook for his terminal parochial visit. Elias Hawthorne dispatched a frantic wire imploring the cleric for absolution to the full domain. On arrival, Reverend Harlan found the spread unnaturally still. The tobacco rose lay barren despite clement April skies. The habitual hum of a state rhythm had halted. Elias ushered Reverend Harlan to the kin oratory, a modest annex to the manor. Within, the full Hawthorne clan tarried with Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon. I've ne'er presided o'er, shriving thus, Reverend Harlan deposed. Elias craved individual unburdenings, yet afore the full assembly. It flouted every canon of confessional veil. But he importuned. He proclaimed them one kin knit by pact, that their unbosomings must be beheld mutual. What Reverend Harlan absorbed that forenoon would shadow his days unto dust. Eliza Hawthorne unburdened, she'd spurned her spouse's divine steerage, that she'd impugned his celestial portents. I've cavilled at what Elias deems imperative, she husked amid sobs. And I've pondered bolting with the brood, but I ken now 'tis the adversary luring me. Elias is singled for a vast and dire labor, and I mustn't bar heaven's design. Each child owned terror of dissolution, dearth of conviction for what Reverend Harlan yet fathomed, not impended. Then Josiah's turn. I've bolted thrice in my span, Josiah intoned, voice firm, though tears coursed. Once at 22, twice at 27, both halls recaptured. Saw Elias's sire lashed me, but saw Elias pled clemency. He deigned me befuddled, ignorant of my ordained slot in the Lord's weave. Now, saw Elias bids a ultimate crossroads. He declares the blueskins advance with spurious liberty. He Evers' veritable release dawns solely in yielding to the divine writ. He posits, should Rebekah, Solomon, and I essay flight anew, swallow Yankee deceits, weed court perdition, unending. But yield we to our troth with the Hawthorne line, transit collective to the hereafter. We'd cleave in glory as chained on terra, sans torment and trespass. Reverend Harlan at length pierced the veil. "I straightly quizzed Elias on contemplating self-slaughter," the cleric deposed. Then he waxed serene and stark. He disavowed suicide as transgression. He framed it as fealty to celestial edict. He invoked Abraham's readiness to immolate Isaac. He posited the Almighty assays the true by bidding seeming vice that proves virtue. He avowed a theophany, unmediated divine missive, charging him to shield his blood from the blight and bedlam inbound. Reverend Harlan essayed logic with Elias, expounding no true epiphany would breach doctrine on life's holiness. He menaced Elias with ban from fold. He pled with Eliza to snatch the young and vanish. He even essayed, swaying Josiah to bolt forthwith, spiriting his kin to federal sentries. But Eliza's incantation gripped to firm. Eliza avowed bride's vow to bridegrooms. The young, schooled months in dogma, spake of venerating their begetter. And Josiah, ground by decades in yoke, puppeteered by Elias's scriptural snares, pinned twixt familiar fiend and nebulous tomorrow, couldn't muster the bolt. Reverend Harlan departed Willowbrook in throes of turmoil. He hied straight to the county marshal, limning what he'd gleaned and clamoring for halt. But 'twas April 1863 in rebel Virginia. The marshal, swamped with while hunts, pilfer probes, and bulwark for the Yankee thrust, waved off the cleric's alarms as pious vapors. Elias Hawthorne's a pillar planter, the marshal rejoined. "I can't clap irons on a soul for brooding baleful. Should he enact felony, hie back and we'll parley. Till then, I've substantive snares afoot." Reverend Harlan assayed Willowbrook anew next morn. He was rebuffed at the palisade by a foreman averring the clan shunned callers. He retried April 8th, rebuffed afresh. By April 12th, Reverend Harlan despaired to the brink of flouting ecclesiastical code and branding Elias from the lectern. But Elias and his didn't grace chapel that Lord's Day. They were already gone. The quaternary and terminal episode, the happenstance that birthed the revelation, befell pure by quirk. On the gloaming of April 12, 1863, 4 rebel troopers went rogue from their outpost, nigh Manassas. Skulking west to safe rebel turf, they traversed Prince William after dusk. Chilled, famished, forlorn, they hazarded Willowbrook's verge to cadge victuals. What met their gaze would scar them lifelong. The manor glowed like Yuletide. Every casement of the big house flickered with tapers. In the kin plot, plain from the trace, brands flared round 8 newborn barrows. The troopers crept wary. They caught a solo baritone intoning a psalm, "Nearer my God to thee," drifting on the breeze. At the plot's rim, they spied Elias Hawthorne amid the digs, caked in loam, spade in fist. At his toes sprawled 8 boxes, all latched. The troopers deposed Elias seemed startled, yet unperturbed by their eruption. He placidly shelved his tool and expounded he'd fresh interred his household. "Why," one trooper blurted, "for the Almighty bade it," Elias reposted. When the troopers quizzed plague or pestilence felling 8 souls, Elias clarified they'd thrived sans ailment. "We partook the cup conjoint," he said. "When the vintage was hallowed, it ferried us heavenward." One trooper, Theodore Grant from Stafford County, limbed the upshot, and we twigged his jest that he'd dosed them lethal. Lot. I eyed those crates and bethought my own folk, my wee brothers stateside, and I snapped. I seized that spade and clubbed him, clubbed till he stilled. Elias Hawthorne perished by the pits he'd hewn, cranium stove, scheme fulfilled. The 4 turncoats, aghast at reprisal for the carnage, essayed flight. But the junior, scarce 19, couldn't abide quitting sans certitude. At cockcrow April 13th, he fronted county brass and spilled their siding. By midday April 15th, rebel brass rolled on Willowbrook Plantation to sift what emerged as one of Virginia's foulest charnel tableaux. Captain James Thornton of the Confederate Provost Marshal pulled up at Willowbrook at 11:30 a.m. on April 15, 1863, flanked by 8 troopers, 3 county sawbones, and Reverend Harlan, who browbeat to attend. The vista that hailed them was phantasmagoric in its hush. The manor loomed immaculate in the forenoon glare, its ivory pillars agleam, its pleasances groomed pristine. Finches trilled in the elms. The Potomac surged a quarter-mile off, aloof to mortal woe. Solely 3 jars marred the idyll, the 8 barrows in the kin-plot. The corpse of Elias Hawthorne shrouded under canvas where the turncoats dumped him, and the tomb-like quiet from the slave rose. Captain Thornton inscribed in his dispatch, "The hush smote me foremost." An estate throbs with clamor labor, tongues, the pulse of routine. Willowbrook lay mute as mausoleum, and as we'd anon ken, that trope struck truer than fathomed. Reverend Harlan piloted the band straight to the plot. 8 boxers reposed in 8 digs, each pegged with a makeshift fir, stake-etched name and date. April 12, 1863. The stakes read, Eliza Hawthorne, cherished spouse, age 35. Jacob Elias Hawthorne, cherished heir, aged 14. Clara Eliza Hawthorne, cherished daughter, age 12. Arthur Lewis Hawthorne, cherished heir, age 9. And Mary Rose Hawthorne, cherished daughter, age 6. Josiah, loyal retainer, aged 42. And Rebecca, loyal retainer, aged 40. 1 moniker absented, Solomon, age 20. Captain Thornton ordained exhuming all 8 forthwith. The troopers spaded, and in 90 minutes they'd hauled the inaugural box, the one staked for Eliza Hawthorne. Dr. Elias Beaumont, one of the chirurgeons on hand, evoked the unsealing. The reek assailed us initial. Not rot, 'twas but 2 days, but elsewise. Laudanum, bitter almonds, and beneath, something fouler. Lid full ajar. I reeled. Sundry troopers retched. Eliza Hawthorne reclined in the box, clad in bleached cerement, palms folded o'er bosom, lids shut. At cursory, she might have slumbered beatific, but her nails bled raw. The pallid taffeta pads scarred with chlorants, and on close probe of her visage, Dr. Beaumont spied what would dog his slumbers. Pinprick petechia round her orbs and maw, which had blued. She was inhumed vital, Dr. Beaumont averred in affidavit. The draught hadn't slain her. It merely numbed. She roused in the box and clawed for egress. Demise stemmed from suffocation. The second box, Jacob, the firstborn, echoed the saga. Claw scars on timber, ragged digits, proof of anguished vigil in void. By the third unsealing, Clara, the 12-year-old half the troopers, had staggered off. Captain Thornton called for brandy from the manor cellars. Reverend Harlan chanted nonstop, timbre cracking. Clara's form was kinked in the crate, one palm aloft as thrusting the cover. Her cerement rent. Her countenance bespoke not repose, but sheer dread. The fourth held 9-year-old Arthur. His wee mitts posed in orison by his sire, but they'd splayed in spasm. One palm masked his kisser as if gulping air through digits. 6-year-old Mary crammed the 5th. Dr. Beaumont deposed later this sundered him outright. Her so diminutive, the box adult scale, she evoked a pop at a bed. Her orbs gaped. In decease, she'd pried them in the black. A bairn stirring, boxed alive, mewling for dam who couldn't heed. I've ushered hordes of newborns, mended every woe and wound conceivable, but not so profane as that wee lass's vacant stare. The 6th and 7th cradled Josiah and Rebecca. They mirrored the motif inhumed breathing, revival, frantic bids for air, end by throttling gloom. But Rebecca's husk bore an extra that hinted her unique Gethsemane. Her palms crossed our womb, and on Dr. Beaumont's scrutiny, he unearthed what Elias Hawthorne patently ignored or slighted. Rebecca stood some 5 moons, gone with child. The band clustered in the plot, ringed by yawning crates, grappling the grotesquerie. Captain Thornton dispatched his men to ransack the manor for strays and pinpoint Solomon, whose box vanished. Their manor trove furnished the capstones of the terror. In the refectory, the board laid 4 the 8 felled, plus Eliasnine platters, 9 goblets, 9 silver arrays. At tables, Core perched a cut-glass flagon of ruby claret, laced with Lee's lab tests, would peg as a titanic laudanum jolt fused with pulped foxglove pods. Quantum 2 fell grown folk in hours, yet meted to stupor for sepulture sans instant cardiac halt. In Elias Hawthorne's scriptorium, they netted his daybooks. The daybooks, tallying nigh 350 leaves penned in his terminal half-year, afforded ingress to a psyche plummeting to derangement masked as godly gleam. The leaves commenced sedate, tallying yields and dispatch, but by September 1862, timbre lurched, and the divine spake in slumber. Elias inscribed September 21, 1862. He unveiled the age ahead, blaze and gore and anarchy. He bared blueskins ravaging our hearths, quondam thralls uprising to butcher us abed, civility crumbling to savagery. But then he bared an althpath. He bared a line ascending to azure, unscathed by terrestrial taint. He queried, "Wilt thou play Abraham? Wilt thou cherish thy blood enough to ransom from the tide?" The leaves burgeoned, baroque and baleful. Elias chronicled colloquies with the Almighty waxing granular. He graphed his blueprint and finical. The hour, the mode, the entombment, in the epitaph for the clan Steely. On March 25, 1863, he scribed, "I've limned all to Josiah. He balks as Abraham erst balked." He cites Rebekah's burden, Solomon's vigor, that they essay liberty when blueskins land. But I've marshaled text. I've shown earthly manumission pales 'gainst everlasting. I've recalled he and his are lashed to us by more than statute, by fondness, by annals shared, by sacred bond. Gradual, he yields, he weeps, but bows. Rebekah resists fiercer. Dames ever do, but she knuckled to her lord's sway as Eliza to mine. The ultimate leaf, datelined April 12, 1863, chilled upmost. This eve we share the chalice conjoined. I've sanctified the draught as Messiah hallowed at supper's close. We'll quaff and recline in our crates whilst we may yet stir array with grace. I've gauged the quantum precise. We'll drowse ere we perish, and perish ere we rouse serene and conjoined. Come morn, I'll latch the crates and inhume. Then I'll sip my parcel and stretch in the plot by my blood, and we'll all rouse in bliss everlasting, beyond blueskin grasp and their maelstrom. Elias Hawthorne, August 15, 1825 to April 13, 1863. A potter who cherished enough to redeem. But Elias's reckonings faltered. The laudanum foxglove brew didn't dispatch his kin presentience. It merely benumbed and befuddled long enough for him to crate, latch, and heap them vital. Scouring the domain, troopers snagged one more linchpin relic. Solomon Heed, holed in a gear barn by the furrows, gibbering from shock. When at length they soothed him to speech, he unfolded the transpiring. But saw Elias decreed we sip the draught. Solomon deposed. All of us as one kin. Papa eyed me and Mama and nodded. He'd harangued us weeks on it, averring sole egress that blueskins heralded viler woe. Mama wept, but demurred not. We all sipped. Solomon evoked stirring hours hence, frame leaden and slack. He lay crated in the oratory, but the top unsealed yet. Through slitted lids, he spied Elias Hawthorne flitting mid-crates, wielding mallet and brads to latch each. And I strained to budge, to halloo, but couldn't muster tone, Solomon recalled. Heard my mama, she voiced wailing from her crate. Saw Elias caught it too. He paused, palmed her box, and soothed, Peace now, Rebekah. 'Twill pass swift. You'll rouse in fairer realm. Then he latched her crate fast and firm. When Elias neared Solomon's crate, Solomon mustered shift enough to nudge the top half shut, feigning latched from afar. Elias, laboring by rushlight and waxing harried to conclude pre-aurora, patently overlooked. Post-Elias trundled all crates to the plot and commenced heaping. Solomon recouped sinew to shove his top and lurch from the oratory. He pelted to the furrows and burrowed, hearkening his sire's inhumed vital, powerless to aid, shackled by scar and dregs. He lurked as the turncoats came, as Elias fell, as brass rolled at daybreak. And why not high for aid? Captain Thornton quizzed. Whither bolt? Solomon reposted. I'm thrall. Tude credit me. And sundry august Prince William squires leaned on Reverend Harlan to seal what he'd glimpsed in his valedictory call. The cleric, rent twixt scruple and duress from mighty houses, struck a truce. He'd not air Elias's unburdening particulars or his own botched bids to thwart, but he'd balk any right-limbing Elias Hawthorne, aught but slayer who'd forfeited his essence. The rebel gazettes abetted the shroud. A terse item graced the Manassas Gazette, April 27, 1863. Elias Hawthorne, Prince William County, and kin have succumbed to inadvertent toxication. The shire grieves this mischance, not of slaughter, not of vital burial, not betraying the gangrene gnawing planterdom's core, but verity couldn't be wholly hooded. Troopers at the disinterring babbled to mates. Chirurgeons who aside the husks bandied the affair in guild. Thrall's county round gleaned the tale, disseminating via webs White's feigned phantom. When Federals seized Richmond in May 1863 and thrust to flank counties, they met hordes of bondsmen bolting to their veins, and throngs invoked the Willowbrook hecatomb as token of perils lingering on estates with owners teetering to despair. Union Brigadier Benjamin Butler, Marshal Prefect of occupied Virginia, caught wind of Willowbrook in June 1863. He tasked his marshals to sift what he dubbed outrage wrought under guise of chattel claim. But by then, Prince William had devolved to no man's turf twixt blue and gray. Willowbrook itself scoured bare of worth by rival hosts, most opponents scarpered or pressed. The federal sift bogged, but birthed one weighty sheaf. Solomon's deposition, soul unscathed mid the doomed. Solomon had legged to Union Pale late April 1863. In his inquest of June 4, 1863, he rendered the fullest chronicle of Elias Hawthorne's waning moons and the mind war he'd loosed on Josiah, Rebekah, and self. And so Elias would aver the blueskins fiends, Solomon deposed. And he'd feign proffering freedom, but veritably wield and ditch us to famine. He'd cite ex-thralls northward faring fouler than us, croaking in lanes with none to tend. He'd parse Yankee rags on Hugh riots and outrages 'gainst folk of color in northern hives. Then he'd rejoin, Josiah, thou can I've ever dealt square. Thy kin hath niche here. Why swap surety for blueskin guile? Solomon limbed how his sire Josiah had been methodically unmade o'ermoons of this machination. But Papa wearied, Solomon said, 42 years leashed will, saw Elias ken precisely how to ply him. He'd sermon heaven, how therein no sires and serfs, just essences equal for the throne. He rendered dying as release. He framed its sole release Papa might claim and beyond. The starkest shard of Solomon's inquest touched his dam, Rebekah. Mama ken she bore babe, Solomon divulged. She fronted saw Elias, hoping it'd quell his ravings. Instead, he termed it heaven's nod that the issue would hatch straight to glory, pristine and free of worldly blot. He dubbed Mama Grace to birth, her get direct to Elysium. Hearing that, somewhat sundered in her, she ceased strife. She yielded. The Union sift docketed the felony, but assayed no redress. Elias Hawthorne lay cold. The rebel hood's hood veiled the slayings, lay beyond federal writ. And as the fray crested, Willowbrook devolved to one outrage amid myriads. Solomon's inquest fulfilled one aim. It winged to the War Office in Washington and at length snared Frederick Douglass, the liberator and ex-thrall. Douglass ran snips from Solomon's sheaf in his Douglass Monthly September 1863 with his gloss. On the terror of Willowbrook Plantation, Douglass penned, lies not outlier but unveiling. It bears slavery's endgame writ large. The plenary sway of one over another stretched to extremist. Elias Hawthorne deemed he held Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon so holy he held in their ends that he might pick instant and mode of their wane as blithely as culling beeves. And the realm granting him this sway is the realm now warring to uphold bondage. Let none prate again of tender sires or kin ties twixt thrall and lord. Willowbrook bears the sooth. Any regime bestowing such might will birth such beasts. Douglas's gloss thrust Willowbrook slayings to national glare first time. Northern sheets snatched the yarn. Emancipation orators invoked it as proof of bondage's ethic rot. It swelled the roster of abominations stoking Union zeal to raise the thrall south root and branch. But in Virginia proper, the pall endured. Post-fray and Reconstruction, bids arose for full ledger of felonies under yoke. The Freedmen's Bureau sifted hordes of manslaughters, torments, and maltreats. Willowbrook merited this audit. Stead, Augustine Hawthorne, who'd trimmed Union fealty scant to dodge holding seizure, parlayed his brother deranged. That hounding a corpse availed naught, and that sullying the Hawthorne cognomen yielded zilch save fresh rift. The Freedmen's Bureau factotum on case, a Rhode Island captain dubbed Jonathan Hale, fumed at this casuistry. In Epistle to Brass, dated February 14, 1867, he scribed, "Equity craves plenary public ledger of Willowbrook outrage. Waiving prosecution broadcasts that Josiah, Rebekah, and their unborn's breaths weigh nil. That their ends can palliate neat's cloak of chattel writ. Should we brook this, we betray all this crusade ostensibly won." But Hale's headman quashed him. Virginia 1867 teetered on convulsion brink. The Freedmen's Bureau reeled neath exigent dockets, vagrants craving bread and roof, wage wrangles, ceaseless brunt on extrals. Chasing a tangled affair with slain prey 'gainst slain felon smacked thriftless. The case shuttered sans juridical close. Solomon, lone unscathed, essayed forging fate in Reconstruction Virginia. He plied joinery in Richmond, wed-sired. But Willowbrook cicatrix endured. In 1880, a Richmond Whig scribe traced Solomon and quizzed on the hecatomb. Solomon, now 37, spake the perduring scar, and still I dream the crate. I dream saw Elias latched mine too, that I'm heaped with sires, clawing plank in black. I bolt upright, howling at whiles, and my bride must remind I slipped, that I endured. But moiety of me muses if I verily endured or merely paced a fresh crate, since the scribe quizzed if Solomon pegged Elias Hawthorne, daft or dire. Solomon's riposte, tempered. Folk crave deeming him cracked, caused his simpler kenning. Cracks Patmere, ill hop, like thunderstroke. But saw Elias wasn't cracked. He wrought precise what bondage schooled, deeming soul's chattel he might jettison at whim. Soul quirk setting him part other sires was his oral love, barring release. Most sufficed, owning our breaths. He craved owning our ends too. Bondage armed him that can. Bondage rendered it. Thou seekest what's cracked. What's cracked is none forestalled him swifter. That folk spied portents and stirred zilch. That imposed, his kin clutched repute and acres while my sires mouldered in soil that should have been ours. The scribe's piece sparked fleeting Willowbrook redux. Sundry Reconstruction polls wielded it as Y extrabale's bar power. But by 1880, Reconstruction foundered. White Virginians clawed back sway by force. The climb soured 'gainst any bondage horror palaver. Within 12-month Willowbrook yarn ebbed from Agora anew. The 4 rebel turncoats who'd unearthed the crime and felled Elias Hawthorne faced no dock. Strife's melee barred pursuit. And postpox, the nascent Virginia regime cared not for dooming lads for slaying one who'd wrought such ends. Theodore Grant, who'd dealt the death stroke, later heired to a queerier. Folk whiz, if I rue it, if it dogs me that I felled a man. I tell him I slumber sound. I've wrought in fray I'm shamed by, but halting Elias Hawthorne ain't one. Soul rue is I didn't clock air. He heaped those souls that I couldn't redeem em. Reverend Harlan Nair mended from his thwart. He fled Prince William in 1864 and spent remainder at a Carmelite cloister in Maryland, where hush ruled. Mates visiting marked him eternally shadowed. Cloistering hours diurnal and oratory suing pardon. On his demise in 1882, brother recluses unearthed an unsent leaf to Eliza Hawthorne. I should have wrought more, it ran. Should have bodily barred thy spouse from woe. Should have breached shriving veil and cried his blueprint aloud. Should have snatched thy young and stowed em where he couldn't quest. I prized protocol and seemliness o'er thy breaths, and that poltroonery damns me surer than any trespass I've owned. I sue that in decease thou saint found the serenity I denied thee in vita, and I sue the divine doom me harsher than thy spouse. For I ken better and wrought zilch. The Willowbrook Plantation hecatombs of 1863 have slipped large from annals' recall, sepulchred neath the selfsame urge to oblivion that cloaked the crime ab initio. No plaque graces the stead. The spread parceled and peddled in the 1880s. The acres now bear ranch homes, a plaza, and a spur of Virginia Route 234. The plot where 8 gasped in void lies asphalted. Naught lingers save shards in repositories, rags yellowing in stacks, and deponent yarns scarce scanned. But the affair merits recall not as freakish outlier or Gothic yarn, but as casement to bondage's marrow logic. Elias Hawthorne's deeds, abhorrent as they stood, crowned a regime reared on plenary might our fellow men. Bondage-seated lords not mere toil's lash, but our flesh, sires, transit, very esse. This plenary might ineluctably vitiated in lords deeming self-clement. Elias Hawthorne verily credited he cherished Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon. By his realm's yard he likely ranked milder than mean. He licensed their nest as kin, literacy for Josiah, parley on yields, deemed adjunct hearth. But that cherish rooted in dominion. In axiom, these men belonged to him intrinsically. When Elias fronted exigency, the waning of his ken realm, the cherish, turned lethal. He couldn't frame Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon as sovereigns charting own fates in freedom and futurity. He could soul frame as his line's limbs, fated, share his doom. This bears profound on bondage's grain the American South slaved to shroud. The yoke vitiated not soul via brutality and brunt ubiquitous, though those, but via warping man-bond self. Cherish under yoke, ever fouled by might. Fealty under yoke, ever wrung. Sire ties, twixt thrall, and lord ever baseless core. For true kin-cherish craves parity and volition, the veriest bondage denied. The affair bears to the realms broader a bet in birthing such terrors. Elias Hawthorne masked not his psychic skid or waxing queerness. He erred to his cleric. He spooked his corrosion. He tallied at the mercantile auto-hoisted scarlet flags. Sundry beheld his plunge and wrought no telling halt. Why? 'Cause the weave granting him plenary o'er Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon likewise seated him nigh plenary o'er bride and get. Eliza Hawthorne, under Virginia code, lacked juridical standalone. Couldn't hold soul, couldn't quit him, couldn't wrest get from his pale sands 'cause courts it uphold, and my lord muses mass demise patently sufficed not. The sire sway buttressing bondage near barred shielding Elias's pale prey. Reverend Harlan's lapse edifies utmost. Here stood a soul who plain Ken Elias plotted hecatomb, who assayed metal, who hied Telaic brass, and who found wholly checkmated by weave prizing chattel claim and sirit, o'er man breath. The marshals I can't clamp for brooding baleful. Ring sage till thou grasp those brooding spanned graft blueprints for 8 ends. But in 1863 Virginia, a lord's hearth was his bastion, and realm's metal hemmed sharp. This vibe replayed cross the slave South in milder but tantamount modes. Thralls lashed, ravished, toiled to dust. rent from sires, subjected every abuse conceivable. And abutters, clerics, laic brass, nine-air meddled, cause bondage birthed ethic juridic frame, where such stood patent writ or unpresecutable. The post-unearth Paul recounts own saga on how realms cope with root sins. The rebel brass in Hawthorne House toiled frantic to quash the stark yarn, 'cause it bared o'er much on weave they warred to uphold. If Elias Hawthorne mere loon, outlier, then bondage self unscathed. But if he crowned bondage's axioms on might and chattel in men, then the whole pile grew untenable. E'en post fray. In Reconstruction, when theory carved space to reckon yoke's terrors, Willowbrook got deliberate sepulchre. White Virginians craved onward sands past pay. They hankered myths of clement lords and blithe thralls, better lots in leash than free. They feigned bondage paternal weave of reciprocal dues rather than terror regime and plenary might. The thwart to pursue, to forge full public docket, to enshrine Josiah and Rebekah as yoke's prey rather than loyal retainers felled in vague mischancel betokened choice prizing pale ease, hour, sooth, and equity. Solomon's yarn of pacing fresh crate limbs, yokes perduring cicatrix and wake. Ex-thralls bore psyche gashes lifelong. They paced realm oft spurning what wrought reyoking via peonage and black codes, deeming their throes lesser than pale accord. Willowbrook baits two mass and suicides writ broad. Shrinks a saying kin quell peg motif. They dub extended family eradicators. Souls oft males who frame kin as self-limbs, not sovereigns, and retort to exigency or kin lapse by raising all rather than brook vita beyond patriarch pale. K. Elias Hawthorne slots this mold, flawless, with yoke's boon. Juridic social nod to frame Josiah, Rebekah, and Solomon precise as he framed own Gata's wards whose fates he righted control absolute. The Willowbrook hecatombs struck at apocalypse pivot in Southern weave. The Civil War posed existential crux for the Lord cast. Their full orbicose, social, politic, psychreode on yoke. Abolition's specter wasn't sole chattel lost, though that loomed vast but plenary append of hue hierarchy they deemed divine writ. Elias Hawthorne's skid to end suicide must frame in this. He verily credited civility's end. He credited Blueskin's demon hosts, unmaking Lord's order. And he credited soul safeguard for his line's esteem and essences lay yanking from annals ere new realm could taint. Woeful, he stood not lone in such ken. Crossed rebel lands, as route loomed, sure. Strays surfaced of Lord's self-felling and kin, rather than front vita post-manumission. Most hushed akin Willowbrook. But motif hints Hawthorne ends. Extreme in craft, echoed vaster psyche crisis mid-lordlings, unable frame Essie Sands plenary o'er others. In decades post-Reconstruction, founder and black codes supplanting yoke, white Southrons wove Baroque mythos on Old Dominion gracious spreads. Kindly sires, content thralls faring finer leashed than loose. This mythos braced bar, disenfranchise, ongoing who terror. Willowbrook rends the mythos core lie. Elias Hawthorne, by tally one of those kindly sires mythos hemlettered. Refined, devout, not brute-famed yet, when tested, his kindness bared fresh yoke, his cherish fresh jive, his might literal slayer. Had we recalled Willowbrook, kept it in shared recall with yoke's other abominations, perchance we'd less succumbed to lost cause romance. Perchance we'd clear ken, the flaw lay not soul cruel lords, but lords' very being. One terminal upshot merits nod, the peculiar void terror of vital burial. Elias Hawthorne aimed his kin perish somnolent, husks posed with dignity, transit to dust hushed and right bound, but his blueprint misfired in utmost nightmare vein. His prey roused in sable and boxes heaped under, perished in dread, clawing vain at unyielding plank. This glitch near to apt emblem. Elias craved sway, all iron dust self. He craved scripting fair tragedy, but dust bows not sway. Throw bows not aesthetic, and men, e'en dosed and heaped, will scrap for breath. Eliza rent her cerement, Clara tore her palm aloft. Wee Mary's orbs pried in black. They bowed not. They quit, not mute. In finale throes, they spurned the tale Elias scripted M. And perchance, that's Willowbrook's various precept. The yen for plenary sway o'er fellow men stands not soul ethic wrong, but ultimately unfeasible. Souls resist, they scrap. They gainsay doled rolls. Solomon endured 'cause he stirred precise instant, 'cause he feigned number than was, 'cause he wielded the scant agency at hand. That sliver liberty just enough to nudge crate toper deemed his breath. And perchance, that's why the yarn avails, 'cause it minds that e'en in total sway weaves, e'en in utmost voids, resistance dawns, agency gleams, submission yarns can spurn. The souls felled at Willowbrook Plantation merited that resistance thrive swifter, merited redeem, merited full breaths in freedom and worth. But since we grant not that, least we tender as recall soothful not as loyal retainers quit serene, but as men murdered who scrapped for breath, whose ends arraign not soul one zealot, but full weave rendering such zeal feasible. What say you? What goaded Elias Hawthorne to such inconceivable? Was it fraying realms frenzy, plenary mights and logic, or darker human grain? What shadows your ken? If this yarn stirred your marrow, drop a note below. We thrive on the discourse. And if tales of America's veiled voids grip you, hit subscribe and that bell to shadow our next plunge into the murk where history hides its keenest blades. These aren't dusty relics. They're mirrors to the now, warnings for the yet. Till next, we unearth, keep questioning the tales they bury. The shadows thank you for peering in.